Zayla gazed down from the precipice, a rugged cliff overlooking the alien world sprawling beneath. This planet, light years from her home, was fraught with peril, but Zayla was no ordinary alien. Hailing from a distinguished family, she possessed both bravery and strength. Her mission was vital, to locate a rare element essential for her planet's survival. She had meticulously prepared for every foreseeable danger, but nothing could have prepared her for betrayal. As she cautiously navigated the dense, unfamiliar jungle, a sudden explosion ripped through the air. The ground trembled, and a blinding flash illuminated the sky as a ship descended rapidly. Zayla's heart pounded in her chest. This was no friendly vessel. It belonged to a rival alien faction, notorious for their cruelty, and they had found her. Zayla dove behind a large boulder, praying they hadn't seen her. Their voices, harsh and menacing, echoed through the jungle as they landed nearby. She knew she had to escape quickly, but as she turned to flee, a strong hand clamped down on her arm, yanking her from her hiding place. She struggled, but the grip was too tight. Another alien sneered, reveling in her capture. Zayla's eyes burned with fury, but she was outnumbered. Fighting back was futile. They dragged her toward their ship. Zayla desperately searched for an escape route, her thoughts racing. She needed to remain calm, to survive. As they neared the ship, one of the aliens struck her across the face. Zayla stumbled but quickly regained her footing, her ears ringing with the alien's taunts about her foolishness and isolation. He warned her that her people would never find her. A profound fear, unlike anything she had ever experienced, washed over her. It wasn't the fear of death, but the fear that her people would believe she had failed them. That was a burden Zayla could not bear. They shoved her roughly onto the cold metal floor of the ship. The door slammed shut, trapping her inside. Zayla winced in pain, but quickly sat up, her heart still pounding. The ship was small and confined, offering no obvious escape. Then, from the shadows at the back of the ship, a calm, low voice spoke, asking if she was all right. Zayla's head snapped towards the sound. It was a human voice. It was unusual to hear a human on an alien ship. Humans were not known for their combat prowess, her people considered them weak, powerless compared to her species. Zayla's astonishment deepened as a man emerged from the dim light. Tall, with close-cropped dark hair, he wore a simple uniform that identified him as some sort of military personnel. He didn't appear afraid, only focused. Without preamble, he looked at Zayla and reassured her, promising to get them out. Zayla stared at him, incredulous. How could a human be here? Why was he helping her? Humans were always viewed as inferior by her kind, small, frail creatures who couldn't possibly assist in situations like this. But this man was different. He moved with confidence and purpose, seemingly unafraid of the danger surrounding them. "Who are you?" Zayla asked, her voice still trembling slightly. "My name is Kai," the man replied simply. "I'm with a peacekeeping force. I'm here to ensure this planet remains safe." Zayla struggled to comprehend the concept of a human peacekeeper. It made no sense. Her people had never trusted humans, viewing them as mere tools to be used and discarded. Kai seemed to sense her confusion. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm here to help you, and I won't leave you behind." Zayla experienced a confusing blend of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and a flicker of hope. Could this human truly save her? "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice gaining strength. Kai smiled gently. "Because that's what we do. We help each other, regardless of who or what we are." Zayla was stunned. She had never encountered such sentiment before. Could humans truly be so altruistic? She had always been taught that they were self-serving and weak. Yet, here was a human willing to risk everything for her, a stranger from another world. Before she could respond, Kai gestured for silence. He quickly checked the ship's controls, and the vessel began to vibrate as it lifted off the ground. Zayla realized that this human might be her only chance of escape. She still wasn't sure if she could trust him, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain: he was her best hope for survival. The ship lurched violently, throwing Sarah against the bulkhead. Disoriented, she clung to a nearby handhold as John wrestled with the controls. "They hit our engines," he yelled over the roar of alarms. "We're losing power." Sarah's stomach twisted with fear. They had barely escaped the enemy fleet, only to be crippled in the vast emptiness of space. She glanced at the view screen, a swirling chaos of stars and nebulae. Where were they? How far from the hidden moon base? John worked furiously, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm trying to reroute power," he muttered, his voice strained. "We need to get those shields back online." Sarah watched him, a mixture of terror and admiration churning within her. He was calm, focused, even in the face of what seemed like certain doom. She had never witnessed such unwavering resolve in a human before. Suddenly, the ship shuddered again, and the lights flickered, threatening to plunge them into darkness. "Hold on!" John shouted, bracing himself against the console. The ship lurched violently one last time, then the alarm ceased, and an eerie silence descended. Sarah looked at John, her breath caught in her throat. "What happened?" she whispered. John let out a long, slow breath. "Emergency power kicked in," he said, his voice hoarse. "We're stable, for now. But we're adrift." Sarah's relief was short-lived. Adrift meant they were vulnerable, a sitting duck for the enemy. "How long until they find us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. John shook his head. "I don't know. We're off the grid. They'll be searching, but it could take them time." He turned to her, his expression grim. "We need to send a distress signal. But we can't risk broadcasting our position to the enemy." Sarah's mind raced. She remembered something Tom had mentioned, a coded emergency beacon, designed to reach their allies without alerting the enemy. "There's a coded beacon," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Tom showed me. It's in the auxiliary compartment." John's eyes lit up. "Show me." Together, they made their way through the darkened ship, the only light coming from the emergency panels. Sarah led him to the auxiliary compartment, a small, cramped space filled with equipment. She pointed to a small, unassuming device tucked away in a corner. "This is it," she said. John examined the device carefully. "You know how to activate it?" he asked. Sarah nodded, and with trembling hands, she input the complex sequence of codes Tom had taught her. A faint light pulsed from the device, sending out a silent cry for help into the vastness of space. Now all they could do was wait. Hours crawled by, each one an agonizing reminder of their vulnerability. The silence of the ship was broken only by the hum of the emergency power and the occasional creak of the metal hull. Sarah and John sat in strained silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah wondered about her family, her planet, if she would ever see them again. John seemed equally preoccupied, his gaze fixed on the dark expanse outside the view screen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a faint signal appeared on the communications panel. John's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "It's them," he exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. "They're on their way." Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her, relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of hope. They weren't alone. They had survived. And even though the journey was far from over, she knew, deep down, that they would face whatever came next, together. The faint signal grew stronger, a beacon of hope in the darkness, promising rescue, and the chance to continue their fight for a better future. The ship shuddered, tossing Sarah against a wall. She grabbed a railing as John fought to control the vessel. "Engines are hit," he yelled above the blaring alarms. "We're losing power." A cold dread filled Sarah. They'd just escaped the enemy fleet, only to be crippled in the vastness of space. She glanced at the view screen, a dizzying swirl of stars and nebulae. Where were they? How far from the moon base, their sanctuary? John's face was a mask of concentration as he manipulated the controls. "Rerouting power," he muttered, his voice strained. "We have to get the shields back up." Sarah watched him, fear warring with admiration. His composure amidst impending disaster was unlike anything she'd ever witnessed in a human. She'd always considered them less resilient, less capable. John was proving her wrong. Another shudder racked the ship, and the lights flickered, threatening to extinguish completely. "Brace yourself!" John yelled, gripping the console. One last, violent lurch, then the alarms fell silent, replaced by an unnerving quiet. Sarah looked at John, her voice barely a whisper. "What just happened?" John exhaled slowly. "Emergency power kicked in," he said, his voice rough. "We're stable. For now. But we're adrift." Relief turned to a new wave of anxiety. Adrift meant vulnerable, a target. "How long before they find us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. John shook his head. "No way to know. Our comms are down. They'll be searching, but it could take time." He turned to her, his expression grim. "We need to send a distress signal. But we can't risk the enemy intercepting it." Sarah's mind raced. Tom had shown her something, a coded emergency beacon. "There's a coded beacon," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Tom showed me. Auxiliary compartment." Hope flickered in John's eyes. "Show me." They navigated the darkened ship, the emergency lights casting long, eerie shadows. Sarah led him to the auxiliary compartment, a small, cluttered space. She pointed to a small, inconspicuous device. "This is it," she said. John examined it. "Can you activate it?" Sarah nodded, and with trembling hands, she entered the complicated code sequence Tom had taught her. A faint light pulsed from the device, a silent plea for rescue sent into the void. Now, all they could do was wait. The hours dragged on, each a stark reminder of their precarious situation. The ship was silent except for the hum of the emergency power and the occasional groan of the hull. Sarah thought of her family, her planet, wondering if she would ever see them again. John seemed equally lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a faint signal appeared on the comm panel. John's head shot up. "It's them," he exclaimed, relief flooding his voice. "They're coming." Relief, gratitude, and a flicker of hope washed over Sarah. They weren't alone. They had survived. And even though their ordeal was far from over, she knew they would face whatever came next, together. The signal strengthened, a beacon in the darkness, promising rescue, and the chance to continue their fight. The quiet hum of the ship's engines filled the air as Sarah stared out at the star-dusted expanse. A sense of calm settled over her, a stark contrast to the fear and adrenaline that had coursed through her veins just days ago. They had escaped. John had kept his word, guiding them away from enemy territory to a haven, a place that felt safe, at least for now. But a nagging unease lingered in the back of her mind. The enemy wouldn't simply give up. They would be searching, relentless in their pursuit. And John, despite his kindness, would be in danger too. She'd witnessed their ruthlessness firsthand. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. As if summoned by her thoughts, a jarring alarm shrieked through the ship, shattering the fragile peace. Sarah jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. John's voice, strained but calm, crackled over the intercom. "Sarah, we have company. Stay alert." Fear twisted in her gut. They'd been found. "How many?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Too many to count." "It's a fleet," John replied, his voice tight with tension. Sarah gripped the arms of her seat, her mind racing. She had never experienced real combat. Now, she was about to face an overwhelming force. Weaponless, defenseless, she had only John. "John, what do we do?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "Stay calm. I have a plan, but we need to work together." Sarah nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. What could they possibly do against a fleet? They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. Yet, she trusted him. "Sarah," John's voice cut through her thoughts. I need you to monitor the enemy's movements. You're the best at this. Anything unusual, anything that might give us an advantage, let me know immediately." With trembling hands, Sarah accessed the ship's console, bringing up a display of the enemy fleet. It was a vast, intimidating swarm of ships. She scanned the display, desperately searching for a weakness. She had to contribute. She couldn't just sit passively and wait. "There's a gap in their formation," she said, her voice gaining strength. "If we're fast, we could slip through. They won't expect it." A flicker of hope ignited in John's eyes. "Good eye, Sarah. We're going to try it." The ship lurched forward, accelerating toward the gap. Sarah held her breath as they navigated the narrow opening. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they might escape unnoticed. But just as they were about to clear the enemy line, a violent jolt rocked the ship. "Brace yourself!" John yelled. A deafening explosion ripped through the air, throwing Sarah against the bulkhead. Her head slammed against the wall, and stars burst behind her eyelids. She heard John shouting, but his words were distorted, lost in the roaring in her ears. Pain shot through her body, but she forced herself to focus. The enemy had hit them, but they were still alive. That was all that mattered. "Sarah, are you all right?" John's voice finally cut through the haze. She blinked, trying to clear her vision. "I'm okay." "What happened?" "We took a hit. Shields are down, but the ship's still functional. We have to move." Sarah pushed herself up, ignoring the throbbing pain in her head and the trickle of blood from a cut on her forehead. They weren't out of danger yet. John turned back to the controls, his fingers dancing over the buttons. "We have one shot at this. If we don't make it through this gap, we're finished." Sarah looked at the enemy ships closing in, their weapons charging. The gap was their only chance, but it was a narrow, perilous path. "We can do this," she said, her voice firm. "I'll watch for any ships that try to block us." John glanced at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Good. Stay sharp." The ship roared to life again, hurtling toward the gap. Sarah's eyes darted from ship to ship, searching for any movement that might impede their escape. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had never felt so helpless, so close to death. "Two ships closing in on the left," she shouted. "They're trying to box us in." "I see them. Hold on." The ship swerved violently, narrowly avoiding a blast of enemy fire. Sarah felt the searing heat as it grazed their hull. "Almost there," John muttered through gritted teeth. The gap was shrinking, the enemy ships closing in faster. If they didn't make it soon. With a final burst of speed, John pushed the ship through the gap. Just as they were about to break free, another blast struck their rear, sending the ship spinning out of control. Sarah's stomach lurched. They weren't going to make it. But then, with a Herculean effort, John wrestled control of the ship. It steadied, and a wave of relief washed over Sarah. They were alive. "We're not done yet," John said, his voice fierce with determination. Sarah saw the same unwavering resolve in his eyes. They weren't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The soft hum of the ship's engines was a comforting sound as Alice gazed out at the star-filled void. A sense of peace settled over her, a stark contrast to the terror she'd experienced just days ago. Mark had kept his promise, guiding them away from enemy space to a sanctuary, a place that felt secure, at least temporarily. But a persistent worry gnawed at her. The enemy wouldn't just disappear. They would be searching, relentlessly hunting them down. And Mark, despite his compassion, would be in danger as well. She had witnessed their merciless nature firsthand. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who aided her? As if summoned by her anxiety, a jarring alarm shrieked through the ship, shattering the tranquility. Mark's voice, strange yet calm, came over the intercom. "Alice, we have visitors. Stay alert." Fear called in her stomach. They'd been found. "How many?" she managed, her voice trembling. "Too many to count." It's a fleet, Mark responded, his voice tight with tension. Alice gripped the arms of her seat, her mind racing. She had no combat experience. Now, she was about to face a superior force. Unarmed, defenseless, she had only Mark. "Mark, what do we do?" she whispered, panic rising. "Stay calm. I have a plan, but we need to work together." Alice nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. What chance did they have against a fleet? They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. Yet, she trusted him. "Alice," Mark's voice cut through her thoughts, "I need you to analyze the enemy's movements. You're the best we have at this. Anything unusual, anything that might give us an advantage, tell me immediately." With shaking hands, Alice accessed the ship's console, bringing up a tactical display of the enemy fleet. It was a vast, intimidating swarm of vessels. She scanned the display, desperately searching for a vulnerability. She had to contribute. She couldn't just sit idly by and wait. "There's a weakness in their formation," she said, her voice gaining strength. "A blind spot. If we're fast enough, we might be able to slip through undetected." A spark of hope flickered in Mark's eyes. "Good eye, Alice. We're going for it." The ship surged forward, accelerating towards the gap. Alice held her breath as they navigated the narrow opening. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they might escape unnoticed. Then, just as they were about to clear the enemy lines, a violent jolt rocked the ship. "Hold on!" Mark yelled. A deafening explosion ripped through the air, throwing Alice against the bulkhead. Her head slammed against the wall, and darkness momentarily consumed her. She heard Mark shouting, but his words were distorted, lost in the roaring in her ears. Pain lanced through her, but she forced herself to focus. The enemy had hit them, but they were still alive. That was all that mattered. "Alice, can you hear me?" Mark's voice finally cut through the haze. She blinked, trying to clear her vision. "I'm all right." "What happened?" "We took a hit. Shields are down, but the ship's still operational. We have to keep moving." Alice pushed herself up, ignoring the throbbing pain in her head and the trickle of blood from a gash on her forehead. They weren't safe yet. Mark turned back to the controls, his fingers dancing over the buttons. "We have one chance. If we don't make it through, we're done." Alice looked at the enemy ships closing in, their weapons charging. The gap was their only option, a narrow, perilous path to freedom. "We can do this," she said, her voice firm. "I'll watch for any ships that try to cut us off." Mark glanced at her, a glimmer of gratitude in his eyes. "Good. Stay focused." The ship roared back to life, hurtling towards the gap. Alice's eyes darted from ship to ship, watching for any sign of pursuit. Her heart hammered in her chest. She had never felt so vulnerable, so close to oblivion. 2 ships closing in on the port side. She shouted. "They're trying to box us in. I see them. Brace yourself." The ship veered sharply, narrowly avoiding a blast of enemy fire. Alice felt the searing heat as it grazed their hull. "Almost there," Mark muttered through gritted teeth. The gap was shrinking, the enemy ships converging rapidly. If they didn't make it soon. With a final burst of speed, Mark pushed the ship through the gap. Just as they were about to break free, another blast struck their rear, sending the ship into a dizzying spin. Alice's stomach lurched. They weren't going to make it. But then, with seemingly superhuman effort, Mark wrestled control of the ship. It stabilized, and a wave of relief washed over Alice. They were alive. "We're not out of this yet," Mark said, his voice fierce with determination. Alice saw the same unwavering resolve in his eyes. They weren't giving up. Not now. Not ever. They would find a way to survive, together.